Hello and welcome, dear students. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic, that's proportional representation, prospects and challenges. First, objectives. To give brief outline of the meaning and importance of proportional representation, to evaluate the working of single transferable vote system along with its merits and demerits, to understand the meaning and role of list system in defining the inclusive representation of liberal democracies. Elections determine who is to take control of government. From the conceptual understanding point of view, they also have the advantage of involving a large number of citizens and of producing a large volume of reasonably reliable statistics. So they are one of the best topics for conceptual understanding on mass political behavior. They tell us a lot about how ordinary citizens relate to politics, what they think is important, and how they make up their minds about governments and issues. One of the most basic decisions for any democracy is what voting system it should have. Many have been invented, but it's no simple matter to say what is the best and most democratic. However, each has its advantages and disadvantages, and the choice depends on what one wants from a voting system. Those who value proportionality more than anything else choose a proportional representation system. But others say that the system should above all produce stable and effective government. Some emphasize clear lines of government accountability to the majority of citizens, and others argue for adequate minority representation, on the grounds that democracies are to be judged on how they treat their minorities. Consequently, it may be less a matter of choosing the best voting system than of selecting one of them, knowing what its strengths and weaknesses are in the light of what is expected of a good system. To examine the electoral process is therefore to analyze the central device which has made representative democracy a feasible proposition for large countries. In this lecture, we will examine the formal mechanisms through which society influences the government. We begin with the main linking device in established democracies, that is, varieties of representation of electoral systems with special reference to proportional and winner-take-all system along with single transferable vote system and list system. First, proportional representation. Political institutions shape the rules of the game under which democracy is practiced, and it is often argued that the easiest political institution to manipulate for good or for bad is the electoral system. In translating the votes cast in a general election into seats in the legislature, the choice of electoral system can effectively determine who is elected and which party gains power. While many aspects of a country's political framework are often specified in the constitution and can thus be difficult to amend, electoral system change often only involves new legislation and can thus be subject to manipulation by unscrupulous majority. Even with each voter casting exactly the same vote and with exactly the same number of votes for each party, one electoral system may lead to a coalition government or a minority government, while another may allow a single party to assume majority control. The model of proportional representation stands on the principle that the votes should be weighed, not counted. It has three ingredients. Number one, there is a multi-member constituency. Number second, a candidate is elected not by gaining an absolute or relative majority, but by obtaining a quota of votes that's equivalent to total number of votes cast and divided by the number of seats to be filled. Number third, and there is a mathematically exact, as far as possible, representation of the electorate in the legislature. Proportional representation is a principle which can be achieved by any number of different methods, all of which have the aim, with some qualifications, as we shall see, of awarding to each group of voters its fair share of representation, or putting it another way, of allocating to each party the same share of the seats as it won of the votes. Proportional representation is an electoral system that seeks to create a representative body that reflects the overall distribution of public support for each political party. It is a system where majority or plurality systems effectively reward strong parties and penalize weak ones by providing the representation of a whole constituency to a single candidate who may have received fewer than half of the votes cast, as is the case, for example, in United States. Proportional representation ensures minority groups a measure of representation proportionate to their electoral support. This system of representation has been adopted in many countries, including Belgium, Denmark, Finland, Greece, Hungary, Israel, Italy, Luxembourg, Norway, Russia, Spain, Switzerland. Advocates for proportional representation argue that an election is like a census of opinion as to how the country should be governed, and only if an assembly represents the full diversity of opinion within a country can its decisions be regarded as legitimate. For example, proponents maintain that the plurality system can produce unrepresentative minority governments, such as in the United Kingdom, where the two major parties governed the country for the last 3 decades of the 20th century with little more than 40% of the votes. The proportional system also is suggested as a means of redressing the possible anomaly arising under majority or plurality systems, whereby a party may win more seats with fewer popular votes than its opponents, as occurred in British elections of 1951 and February 1974. Critics of proportional representation contend that in an election, a country is making a decision, and the function of the electoral system is to achieve a consensus rather than a census of opinion. Opponents argue further that by making it possible for small parties to be represented, proportional representation encourages the formation of splinter parties that can result in weak and unsuitable government. A question arises as to how proportional representation system can be put to application. For this sake, two methods have been evolved. One is single transferable vote system and second is list system. This we will discuss now. First, single transferable vote system. Single transferable vote system has long been advocated by political scientists as one of the most attractive electoral systems, but its use for legislative elections has been limited to a few cases: the Republic of Ireland since 1921, Malta since 1947, and once in Estonia in 1990. It is also used for elections to the Australian Federal Senate and in several Australian states, and for European and local elections in Northern Ireland. It has been adopted for local elections in Scotland and in some authorities in New Zealand. It was also chosen as the recommendation of the British Columbia Citizens' Assembly. It was first evolved by the Danish minister Carl Andre in 1793, that was presented in a refined form by Thomas Hare in England in 1851. It is sometimes called the Hare system. Hare, however, could not make it free from the basic defect that has now been removed. According to this system, the voter is given a paper having names and symbols of all candidates on its left side and black columns on its right side. He or she has to fill these blank columns with figures of 1, 2, 3 and so on in order to mark his order of preferences. He may fill all the columns or some of them, but it is required that the marking of preferences should be done correctly. Otherwise, his or her ballot paper should be declared invalid. At the time of counting, all invalid papers are cancelled and the total number of valid ballot papers is divided by the number of seats to be filled up plus 1, and then the figure of 1 is added to the quotient. In case the remainder is more than half of the denominator, the figure of 1 is further added to the quotient. This is called electoral quota. This formula may be presented as electoral quota equal to total number of valid votes plus 1 divided by total number of seats plus 1. For instance, if there are 107 votes polled in an election and out of which 17 are declared invalid, then there remain 90 valid votes. If the total number of seats is 4, the electoral quota would be 90 divided by 5 is equal to 18 plus 1 is equal to 19. After this, counting begins. A candidate securing votes equal to or more than that of the quota is declared successful. If some seats remain vacant, the candidate having least number of votes is eliminated and his votes are transferred to other candidates according to the order of second preference marked by him. This process continues and votes are transferred according to subsequent preferences until all the seats are filled up or only the required number of candidates remains in the field after the elimination of other candidates. In this way, only those candidates are declared elected who obtain the quota after transfer of surplus votes, or the votes of those candidates who have procured the least number of votes at the polls and are therefore progressively eliminated. Dear students, now we will discuss the advantages of single transferable vote system. The advantages claimed for proportional representation generally apply to single transferable vote systems. In addition, as a mechanism for choosing representatives, single transferable vote is perhaps the most sophisticated of all electoral systems, allowing for choice between parties and between candidates within parties. The final results retain a fair degree of proportionality, and the fact that in most actual examples of single transferable vote, the multi-member districts are relatively small means that a geographical link between voter and representative is retained. Furthermore, voters can influence the composition of post-election coalitions, as has been the case in the Republic of Ireland, and the system provides incentives for inter-party accommodation through the reciprocal exchange of preferences between parties. Single transferable vote also provides a better chance for the election of popular independent candidates than list proportional system, because voters are choosing between candidates rather than between parties. although a party list option can be added on a single transferable vote election. This is done for the Australian Senate. Dear students, now we will discuss the disadvantages of single transferable vote system. The disadvantages claimed for proportional representation generally also apply to single transferable vote systems. In addition, single transferable vote is sometimes criticized on the grounds that preference voting is unfamiliar in many societies and demands at the very least a degree of literacy and numeracy. The intricacies of a single transferable vote count are quite complex. This has been cited as one of the reasons why Estonia decided to abandon the system after its first election. Single transferable vote requires continual recalculations of surplus transfer values and the like. Because of this, voters under single transferable vote need to be counted at counting centers instead of directly at the polling place, where election integrity is a salient issue. Counting in the actual polling places may be necessary to ensure legitimacy of the vote, and there will be a need to choose the electoral system accordingly. Single transferable vote, unlike closed list proportional representation, can at times produce pressures for political parties to fragment internally because members of the same party are effectively competing against each other as well as against the opposition for votes. This could serve to promote clientelistic politics where politicians offer electoral bribes to groups of defined voters. Single transferable vote can lead to a party within a plurality of votes, nonetheless winning fewer seats than its rivals. Malta amended its system in the mid-1980s by providing for some extra compensatory seats to be awarded to a party in the event of this happening. Many of these criticisms have, however, proved to be little trouble in practice. Single transferable vote elections in the Republic of Ireland and Malta have tended to produce relatively stable, legitimate governments comprising one or two main parties. Dear students, now we will discuss list system. Here the candidates are grouped in lists according to the labels of their political parties. Each party submits a list of its chosen candidates equal to the number of seats to be filled up or even less than that. The voter is asked to vote for a particular list. That also means his preference to the candidates in the order given in that very list. It's a different thing that in some countries the voters are given extra freedom to show their individual preferences to the candidates as well. At the time of counting, election quota is determined in the same manner as discussed earlier. Then it is seen which party has secured votes in what percentage, and the seats are apportioned between or among them according to the same percentage. Suppose a party secures 50% votes in an election for 20 seats in all. It has a title for induction its 10 members in the legislature in the same order as given by it in the declared list. It may be that some parties either fail to have a clear-cut percentage of votes. In such a situation, the party may take its surplus percentage to the adjoining or some other multi-member constituency and get its claim duly adjusted by capturing one seat or more by the accumulation of rump surpluses, or it may lend its surplus percentage to some other party so that a seat is obtained by them for a common candidate. The system of proportional representation may be appreciated for several reasons. It is said that it is the best way to ensure representation to all sections of the people as far as possible. It gives political education to the masses and a sense of security to those people or parties that are in minority. It leads to the recognition of political parties in respect of their stands on social and economic problems. The independence of the voters is secured and an effective check on the practices of electoral corruption can be put. It recognizes the nature of modern political parties as based not altogether on sectional divisions, but on social and economic problems of national importance. It is true that the system of proportional representation provides a more accurate representation of electoral divisions and ensures some representation to minority groups, classes, races, and their parties. It also inevitably creates or perpetuates a multi-party system with possible undesirable consequences for a suitable or effective government. It may prevent the development of disciplinary parties and encourage factional groups in the parties and frequent and temporary party alliances. Dear students, to conclude today's lecture, we can say the fundamental principle of proportional representation is that every section of the society will get representation in the parliament in proportion to their population. Different minorities who otherwise will go without representation will get representation according to their strength in numbers. The main purpose of proportional representation is to secure a representative assembly reflecting with more or less mathematical exactness of the various divisions in the electorate. First, we have to decide what should be the basis for the proportional representation. It can be religion, language, nationality, or caste. Advocates of proportional representation point out that a legislature should represent all the sections of the electorate and no minority should go without any representation in the legislature. To make the legislature a true mirror of the nation, it is essential that all the sections are directly and more so proportionately reflected in the legislature. J.S. Mill, being an advocate of proportional representation, has observed that in any real equal democracy, every or any section would be represented, not disproportionately but proportionately. A majority of the electorate would always have a majority of representative, but a minority of the electorate would always have a minority of the representatives. Critics of proportional representation contend that in an election, a country is making a decision, and the function of the electoral system is to achieve a consensus rather than a census of opinion. Opponents argue further that by making it possible for small parties to be represented, proportional representation encourages the formation of splinter parties that can result in weak and unstable government. Unlike the plurality system, which uses single-member districts, proportional representation systems use multi-member constituencies. With this, we have ended today's lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it very well. Thank you.